Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel if you're returning. If you're new here, my name is Tori and I wanted to share a little bit about my reading journal in this video because I did a bunch of updates. As you can see here, I hadn't journaled in this notebook for a while and I just purchased this off of Amazon. It's, I think, the Cafe Note brand. It has the old Tomoe River paper in it, and it's an A6 size. So I am using my TWSBI, I believe that is my medium nib, and I'm using Dominant Industry Winter Night. But when I filled this pen up, I didn't shake the bottle enough to get the shimmer. So, this is also a sped up video because as you can see, I'm doing other stuff. And this is about like 4 hours of off and on journaling because I'm watching TV, I'm stepping away to do other stuff. I'm really just like doing the hobby bits of reading. And so to get into the books, this is like reads that I did throughout, I believe, October and the beginning of November. So these are just a couple that I wanted to reflect back on. The two being the two Christopher Pike books on the left. One was called The Eternal Enemy and the other one was called Give Me a Kiss. And I was just kind of writing about how I always try to pick them up during October because, you know, Christopher Pike, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, is like a R.L. Stine type of writer. He writes a lot of like teenage slashers, and I loved them when I was in middle school. I would run to the school library and like go to that shelf first to see if there was any on the shelf that I hadn't read. But so the Eternal Enemy one was kind of weird. It started out with like the main character got a VCR that started showing her the future, and then by the end she learned that she was like an AI robot. So I felt like that was a bit of a leap, but you know, it happens. And it really was just for the nostalgia more so than it was for anything else. And then the next one was Give Me a Kiss, and that one followed a main character who ends up having her journal brought to her classroom at school without her knowledge, and then the pages are circulated, and the specific pages that are circulated were not true because that particular main character liked to make up scenarios in her journal, just something she did personally that she never expected to get out. So not only was she humiliated, but it was also a false story that she was humiliated with. So she plots the death of she plots the like revenge of like throwing some of these teenagers off their boat, and then like people get killed in the process. Teenage shenanigans. Yeah, that's basically Christopher Pike books for you. The book previously to this Britney Spears memoir, which I've already talked about, so I don't think I'm gonna go too deeply into that one particularly, but the one before that was called Elatsue by Darcy Little Badger, and I started reading that one because it was November, and I do try to like, you know, I try to read authors of color all year round. But specifically when it comes to the Heritage Months, I try to increase that number. And so Darcy Little Badger is an Indigenous author, and Elatsue was a story about an Indigenous teenager who her cousin passes away, and she has the ability to bring things back to life. And she brought her dog back to life after her dog passed away, so she has like a little ghost dog following her around, and it was cool. And I really liked the way the story was told. I did listen to it on audio because I feel like a lot of indigenous writers, like the culture of most indigenous tribes, if not all, from my understanding, is that it was very, what is the word I'm looking for? Auditory? Like, storytelling in their cultures was orally spoken. That's the word I'm looking for, orally. And so usually when I find a book by an indigenous author I'm interested in reading, I do try to get the audiobook because I just feel like it's more immersive. And so I did listen to Alat's Way through the Libby app. If you go to your public library, they probably have it, and you should look at it. It also has ebooks. But Alat's Way, I like the way Darcy Little Badger wrote the book because it's very, it's world buildy because it is set in like a magical realist situation where she can bring things back to life. There are like vampires and all kinds of stuff going on, but it didn't seem like it was a stretch. I feel like, some stories you're like, okay, this is a fantasy, this is a big fantasy, but I think for Alat's Way story, it was like Darcy Little Badger did a really great job of providing that fantastical element without making it seem like too out of left field, and it straddled the line between reality and, like supernatural abilities and species really well, in my opinion. As far as the Britney Spears memoir, I feel like I said before, I've talked about that, but I think the biggest thing I walked away from that memoir with was her ability to summarize her own point of view without tearing anyone else down. I think if anybody has the right to tear people down, it would be her, but she chose not to anyways. She just really told it as respectfully as she could in her own view. And I think that was the biggest impression I walked away from that reading experience with. The one that I am working on right now is called Dreams Lie Beneath by Rebecca Ross. She also wrote Divine Rivals, which is really popular right now, but Dreams Lie Beneath is a young adult book. I also listen to this on audio, and it follows Clementine. She is serving as her father's apprentice as a warden, and they're like magicians who patrol their town for nightmares because nightmares come alive, and they come alive on every new moon. And so when the new moon happens and the nightmares come out, everybody like locks their doors, closes their windows, everything. And Clementine and her dad go through the town, kind of like vanquishing the nightmares that appear. And it's like widely known that children's nightmares are the worst ones to face. And so she's, trying to learn everything she can from her dad, but her dad's also like going through this kind of illness that he goes through every year. He's got a fever, he's really faint, and it's like the worst possible timing because two other magicians come to their town to challenge her father for the role of wardenship or whatever you want to call it, for their town, and Clementine isn't able to defeat them in their little duel because essentially one of the challengers gets to the solution of the nightmare before she does. And I really felt like this could have been 2 books in a way, because like you get past like the first initial conflict of her losing to the magicians. I felt like the first half could have really been drawn out a lot more, and I personally would have enjoyed it, like learning more about the town itself and like her experiences with the town she grew up in, because her character is really connected to that town. But by the end of the book, it feels like a completely different story, because you have different conflicts that have arisen that were not even hinted at the beginning of the book. I mean, they were, but not, I don't know. Rebecca Ross really knows how to bury a lead, is what I'm trying to say. So I felt like I could have gone more, but it was really good, and I enjoyed the storytelling. There was a romantic element throughout that didn't take over the full story. It was mainly fantasy, and I know I like a book, especially when I'm listening to it on audio, when I'm like, the book is going and I've been trying to do housework or something else, and I'm like, I catch myself just sitting and staring into space while I'm listening to it instead of doing the other activity I was trying to get done while listening to the book, because it's so enthralling that like I can't, like, it's like I just like stop and I'm like, what is going on? So that was Dreams Lie Beneath by Rebecca Ross. Sorry if you can hear my squeaky chair. The next one was Dracula. I had been reading this one for a hot minute, and you can see all my tabs on my copy. And I chose some artwork that matched the story. I found these on like Pinterest and online. That actual book cover that I have in my journal, I feel like that's the best depiction of Dracula that I've seen for like a book cover, because he does, like, he is witnessed crawling down the wall of his castle at one point. So I thought that was really neat. And ironically, like, while I tabbed a lot of stuff off, I analyzed the book as I was going. So it was kind of like a throwback to my English degree. I wrote a lot of notes in the margin about my thoughts. And so I started this book with the context of the introduction, because I don't know, I'm not in college anymore. So, I normally will go into a book fully blind, and I usually wait till after to read the introduction, so I'm not, I guess, biased towards it. But I think in this case it actually helped me, because the analysis in the introduction before the actual novel really opened my eyes to what this story was really about. Because if you just read Dracula, you're like, okay, that was a classic book, and without any context of it, you're just like, that was a story. You know, you're not really thinking about all of the implications. So I did read the introduction first, and I actually quoted a lot of the introduction. I was writing down a bunch of quotes. I wasn't writing down like an analysis of the book, because like I said, I had done that in the pages itself, but I wanted to rewrite down some quotes from the introduction mainly, along with quotes that stuck out to me throughout the read that I just felt were so powerful. Like, they were just powerful commentary passages about the true motivations behind Bram Stoker's reasons for writing Dracula. And it stuck out to me that this book really, the way it criticizes femininity versus masculinity is very interesting. It almost got to, like, there were certain points where I'm like, you could definitely read that in a homosexual lens. I do think there is something to be said about depictions of men's friendships in books. I think this may be a controversial opinion, and if you don't agree, I respect that. Please respect my opinion as well. But I think that as a society, we're really quick to jump to two men who are friends being homosexual when that may not be the case, because deep platonic friendships between two men is like, you don't see that a lot in modern literature today. So when you see it in the past, people always want to analyze that into they always want to analyze that into something deeper than it could be. And I definitely see those threads there, but I don't know that it's always the case, is kind of what I'm trying to say. And it was just really interesting because it was very much about how femininity is like a dangerous thing, and it was very anti-women, and very implicit ways today, but I think it was more obvious back in the era that it was written in Victorian times. And Mina Harkness is like the one female in this entire book. So there's like, you have Dracula, you have Van Helsing, you have Jonathan Harkness is who starts the book out. He's he's working for a law firm, and he's gone to Castle Dracula in Romania to get Dracula set up for his travels and establish a home in England. And so he starts the book, and then you go into like Jonathan's engaged to Mina, so you get Mina's journal entries. It's all like journal entries is what it is. It's kind of like epistolary and journal entry. Like that's what it is. And you end up learning this story about Dracula through Mina's experience, Jonathan's experience, Van Helsing, and then there's like 3 other dudes who are also a big part of this. So it's like a little club of dudes plus Mina, right? And it's interesting to me that Mina has such a big role when it's a very feminist book. But some of the criticism in the introduction talked about how, and I think I write it down in the quote somewhere, but the criticism talked about how Mina is acceptable as a woman in the space of Dracula because she takes on masculine traits. And these things and traits are things like she focuses on logic and reasoning over her emotions, and it was really coded and weird. And it was giving all of the Halloween October vibes, because I did start this at the beginning of October, and it was a good mood read, I will give you that. But if you're not in the mindset to read classic literature and fully look at the work through the lens of its time period, and you're just going to read it to read it, I don't think this would be very enjoyable for people. But if you're like interested in it the way I feel like I'm interested in it, and you want to get down to the nitty gritty of like why these characters are motivated the way they are and what it says about the time period and the society that the author was writing in, then yeah, I think this could be a good book to pick up. But I'm not trying to be out here saying that like you should pick up Dracula for a fun read. I just don't. It was more of like a let me flex my English literature degree muscle that I have not used in years. So that was the enjoyable part, I feel like. And some of this fan art was really good. This fan art on this page and the one before were done by the same person. I just found them online, but I feel like you see a lot of Dracula depictions that are not true to the actual character description. But I just feel like Dracula is often depicted as somebody who is either like too human or too monster. And there's not a lot of people or not a lot of depictions that walk the line the way the book does. And so, yeah, I just found that to be an interesting read. So I wanted to journal about it because it did take up a lot of time for me in my reading time this year. I spent like a month and a half on it, and that's pretty long for me. Now, tomorrow was, or wait, is it called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow? It's based off a Shakespeare line. I don't know. But this is by Gabrielle Zevin. And if you haven't read it, it did get a lot of great reviews, and people really enjoyed this book. And I think wholeheartedly for good reason, because it's just a hugely impactful, amazingly written book to me. I started this journaling session solely because I wanted to journal about this book. And I can't fully even put into words how I feel about it still. Like, I had to like stop and walk away and like come back to this to just write about how I felt, because I was so blown away by this book. I've read The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry before. That was a book that Gabrielle Zevin also wrote. She's written, I think, Young Jane Young and other books, but this book follows Sadie and Sam. They're platonic friends who grow up together, kind of, not really. They meet in a hospital because Sam's in the hospital because he has an injury, and then Sadie's in the hospital because her sister is battling childhood leukemia. And they end up developing a friendship with one another that like literally spans their entire life. They do go through phases where they don't speak to each other. And it's just... Okay, so if you like... I would say like this gives me the same kind of emotional hangover that This Is Us, the TV show, gave me. If you ever seen This Is Us, I never even finished it because I was so like emotionally distraught half the time, and it was like an emotional task to watch that TV show. So it's not as intense for me as the TV show is, but it definitely, I couldn't put it down. I read it, I think, within 3 days because I just was so enveloped by Zevin's writing, the way she phrases sentences and makes ironic jokes throughout it. So, like, there's a lot of jokes about how they play games because Sam goes to Harvard for math, and then Sadie goes to MIT for game design. And they're coming up on the cusp of like the explosion of video games in the 90s. And there's just so many references that I so loved because I grew up with like the OG Game Boy and watching the evolution of the PlayStation, and they shouted out Harvest Moon, which I like almost screamed about because I'm a Harvest Moon girly. I still play it on my Switch, and I feel like it even says in the book that Harvest Moon was like one of the first farming simulations, and I was like, yes, give credit where it's due, people, because I'm not yucking others' yums, but Harvest Moon was the OG, okay? There's a lot of other farming simulations out there now, and they are, you know, a great time, but Harvest Moon, man, it's just so great. And I grew up with that too, so seeing that in the text was just like, I feel like this book is a love letter to older millennials and I'm a younger millennial, but I grew up with older siblings, so whatever I was into was because they were into it. So it's a weird dichotomy for me, but I can't say enough good things about this book, man. Oh my goodness. And so some of the stuff that I'm putting down is like fan art from Pinterest of people's interpretations of the first video game that Sam and Sadie create together. The old school Donkey Kong game right there on the page is because Sam grows up playing Donkey Kong in his grandparents' pizza parlor, and he's like always has the highest score and everything. But that's all I have for this video. It was really fast, but in reality it took a while, and these are just some of the books that have impacted me over this year, and I hope it gives you some insight into how I use my reading journal to be as flexible as I need it to be. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below. I love to speak with you all, and I hope if you've made it this far, you'll consider subscribing if you're not already subscribed to my channel, or giving this video a thumbs up to help my channel grow. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!